You know, before I celebrate a Mass, I step forward before the altar in fear and trembling. And I know that right now there's a camera in front of me, not a crowd of people. But I still get fearful because you see the Word of God is so deep, so profound. And I come and I read the Word of God and I get so excited that I want to break it open. And thank God this is why we have our podcast every week before, where we can explain and break open the Word. But I just want to hold on to one pearl right here. And I want to talk about what Jesus says in the second paragraph of the Gospel. He says, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Fear rather those who destroy both body and soul in hell." You see, Jesus starts talking because he sees people being persecuted. He sees people being stoned to death. He sees people being crucified for what is right, beheaded for what is right. And people are saying, "Hey, Jesus, these people are good people. Why? They're following you, and why are you allowing them to suffer? Why are you allowing them to die?" Jesus was really close to John the Baptist, for example. You know, he was imprisoned and he was tortured and eventually beheaded. Why didn't Jesus do anything? He was the miracle worker. He was the way maker. He could open the way. He could have set John the Baptist free from his suffering, but he didn't. This is the same with us. So many times we ask God, why do you allow suffering? Why do you allow pain? And I hear it so many times. I don't believe in God, for example, because God allows suffering. If God is a loving God, why would he allow suffering? Yes, this is a true question. And to be honest, I don't know the answer fully. But I do know this from what Jesus is saying here and the way he lived this out, that suffering is not the ultimate evil. Suffering is not the end. We are all some way, somehow going to suffer, some more than others. You know, if suffering was the ultimate evil, Jesus wouldn't have suffered. You see, Jesus suffered on a cross. He died, he was tortured. Why would God allow suffering of his own son? That's crazy. But the thing is, it is not about the suffering. We go through suffering, and sometimes the suffering is caused through nature, sometimes the suffering is caused through sickness, sometimes it's caused by us, by the wars we create, by the things we eat. There are so many things that suffering can come, but what we can know is that we can choose God in our suffering. We can choose to trust in God in our suffering. It doesn't mean that we're not going to die. It doesn't mean that we're not going to suffer. But you know what? In the Catholic Church, we have a thing called redemptive suffering. We understand that suffering is an opportunity to make us holy, to make us more like Jesus, to make us understand his cross and his love for us. I go to anoint so many people and I see the difference. Those who in their horrible suffering sometimes, but those who learn to trust God in that suffering. And this includes children I've seen suffering and dying. But even I've seen those children, I've seen adults, I've seen the elderly trust in God in their suffering. One man who really inspired me was a man called Father Chris Ray. He was one of my best friends. He was my best friend. And he was diagnosed with cancer, and I saw him just becoming from literally an obese man to becoming a stick in a matter of months. He lost everything and he suffered, but you know what? He was never afraid of suffering and dying. He was never afraid because he trusted God. And you know, I was there just watching him. And I was watching him taking in the suffering, but I was watching him slowly becoming a saint, slowly finding a joy and a peace and a purpose that I started to I started to long for. God, I want to have the peace that Chris has. I want to have the joy that he has, even though he's in pain and he's suffering. He has an incredible joy and peace. And so, even though suffering comes, it is an opportunity sometimes to make us holy if we allow God to work in and through it. Don't be afraid of suffering, as Jesus says in his word, but be afraid of the things that destroy your soul. Be afraid of things that separate you from God. Be afraid of sin. Be afraid of those around you who take you away from truth, from the joy and the peace of Christ. You know, suffering cannot take away our peace. It cannot take away our joy. The only thing that can take away your peace and your joy is your decision not to trust God through your suffering and through the suffering of others. So Jesus, teach us, even in our suffering, our pain, mental, spiritual, and physical, teach us to trust in you.